In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at Gluware's ability to automate Cisco ACI introduced in Gluware 5.1. So let's get started. So here we are in the Gluware instance, and just to show you quickly, this tab shows my Cisco APIC controller. This is an ACI simulator system, but runs the APIC controller, and I have 2 leaves and 2 spines as part of the fabric. So in Gluware, new in 5.1, we've introduced Gluware API modeling, which is really the native integration of the API calls to enable the Gluware App Suite. So here we're going to show you Device Manager and then move on to Config Drift and Audit. So one of the first things you're going to do is add the Cisco APIC controller as one of your devices. So to do that, you're going to go in and add that device. To add it, you're going to select the connection method as Cisco ACI API connection. Cisco ACI happens to use a non-standard basic auth that does require the username, password, and obviously the IP address. So here's the IP address, and then we're tying it to a credential from the new credential manager, also introduced in Gluware 5.1. So just to take a quick look at that, we'll go down to settings here, open up the credential manager. And in this system, I just have one credential here. If I edit it, I've entered in a credential named Cisco ACI Cred, and it is username password oriented, and it is here in my system. So I'm able to use it. So back in Device Manager, I have the connection for my ACI controller set up, the APIC controller, and it's ready to go. So once you have your connection set up and ready to go, it works just like Device Manager for any other device. You just click on the discovery icon here to discover. Upon that discovery, Gluware will execute numerous API calls to collect information about the uni, the fabric membership, the tenant, and all of that is collected and available. You can view the configuration using the standard View Config option. So when you click on View Config, it will take a minute to load, a few seconds to load potentially, just because the size. Like, for example, this particular config from a relatively small system is over 36,000 lines in the text or the dot notation, which kind of flattens out the configuration. You have the option to switch into the JSON view as well. If you click JSON, it will just change the structure into the JSON view versus the dot notation. So this is the same or similar to any other southbound API that we're automating. So you can scroll through and look at, again, the fabric membership, the tenant information, really everything that we've collected from the APIC controller. So all of that information is in the system and in the Gluware system, synchronized with our database and able to use. What we've pulled out of that database includes all of the members of the fabric. So in this case, again, the 2 leaves and 2 spines. And we pulled data into the Device Explorer, which is usable for a quick view of your inventory. So you see the IP addresses, the host name, the OS running, OS version, serial number, SKU, and additional information about the ACI setup, including fabric ID, fabric domain, role, and so forth. So all of that information is provided for you as it typically would be in Device Explorer. So now, next, we're going to move into the Config Drift and Audit application. Let's go ahead and navigate into Config Drift, into the device view. In the device view in Config Drift here, I can see that my current status is unchanged, meaning there's no drift detected. So I can see that here. Now, keep in mind, for Cisco ACI, we are only speaking to the controller. Since everything is centralized through the controller, we're talking through the controller. For things like drift and audit, you're really only going to be drifting and auditing the APIC controller itself. If you want to connect to devices, specifically like NXOS-based devices, you would operate them in standalone mode, and it would be not part of an ACI fabric. Once you're automating with Gluware and it's part of a Cisco ACI fabric, you're going to be doing everything through the controller. So Now that we are in the Drift and Audit app, let's go ahead and simulate a drift condition. So I'm going to navigate into my tenant, and I'm going to go into my tenant named demo. And under the tenant named demo, I'm just going to go in and make a change that is, let's say relatively standard that someone might do. So a user is going through the UI and editing, in this case, a policy and a protocol. And just for demonstration's sake, I'm going to use a DHCP option and modify the relay policy. So essentially like the IP helper. So here I have my correct address, but let's say a user comes in and makes a mistake, a configuration mistake, changing the IP address to something that was not expected by the system to, in this case, introduce drift, but we're also going to take a look at audit. So here I've come in, edited a DHCP address, and I'm going to hit submit and submit change. So now I've changed that system, that config here in the APIC controller that propagates down to the fabric. So now using Gluware, we're going to execute a new capture. So that's a capture snapshot. And I'm going to capture it, on the fly here. You can, again, typically run scheduled captures, or there's various ways to do it. You could trigger it. You could do it from a workflow in Gluware's network RPA. Again, numerous ways to do it. So Gluware is using API calls and synchronizing the Gluware database currently with that configuration, and it's identified drift, right? So when I double click on the Gluware, the captured status, it's going to bring up the capture view and the comparison here. So I can see that there are two deltas, right? Two differences. And so if I just clicked next, you can see Gluware has identified the DHCP option or attribute and has identified exactly that it was expecting the .103 and that it's currently a .100. So this is in the tenant config, and then if you scroll down next, this is also in the Fabric membership config as well. So this particular IP address shows up via two different mechanisms here within the ACI configuration, but it is one change, right? So, this is just a quick demonstration of if you have captured a configuration and you believe it to be the current good state, if someone does go in and make a change and then you're troubleshooting what changed, Gluware's Config Drift can help you identify that change very quickly. So let's move on to the next part of this demonstration, which is audit. So I'm going to bring up my audit browser, my audit policy browser here on the bottom, and I have a pretty simple and straightforward audit built. I'll double click and bring up my my policy, and I'll go into edit so you can see it. This particular policy just has one rule, so you can build out your rule set. I'll open up this rule just to show you that the ability to build, edit, and rules is very straightforward. I have named my rule. I have filtered it for the operating system, which is ACI, which is what we use for the controller. The source is the latest snapshot, which is, again, what we've just captured, which is in the Gluware database. And in this case, I have taken the configuration for the DHCP relay. So again, if you look at a configuration, again, you can view it as JSON, or you can kind of flatten it and view it as text. And when you view it as text, you can see the lines of the statements from an API call that define the DHCP relay attributes here, right? So basically, I've taken the statements that are expected and I've made it a rule, and now I'm going to audit for it. So again, if you're a Gluware user, this is the same mechanism you've been using to build rules or policies and rules, very straightforward. And now with this build, I'm going to change my view to my devices. And selecting this ACI controller here, I'm going to execute an audit of it. And I'm going to be using the current snapshot. I don't have to run a new snapshot since I did just capture the current config. The policy I'm running is the one selected here, which is the tenant DHCP relay policy. Again, a simple and straightforward audit of a single policy. And we're going to go ahead and start the audit. So you can see here, the audit has been run and I have one violation here. So if I view the results, I can see that I do have a violation. If I view it here, what the violation is showing me is that it expected the 10.1.103.101, and the violation here states that that is missing. So this is just an example of where, you can, if you have expected components of a configuration, you can build them out as audit rules, and then you can audit your configuration to ensure you're compliant. So let's go ahead and change this for closure of the demonstration here. We're going to come back in. We're going to change this IP back to the proper configuration and hit submit and submit changes. So now I've restored APIC to what is expected, let's say from, again, as part of this demonstration. So we're going to go back. I can close out these tabs on the top again. And here back at the controller where we have had drift detected, we're going to execute a new snapshot and hit capture. Again, this is triggering Gluware to make API calls to pull the use multiple API calls to pull the configuration into the Gluware system for the tenants, the uni and the fabric membership. And I can see that now there is no drift. So I'm back to, let's say, the known good state prior to any changes made. Now we're going to take this ACI controller again, and we're going to execute an audit policy. We're going to rerun the tenant DHCP relay policy, hit start. It's going to audit very quickly again because the config is already in our database. So when I hit view results, there's no violations found. So this concludes this demonstration, just to show you that the new feature set in Gluware 5.1 introducing the automation of Cisco ACI with API modeling that introduces that ability to integrate with the device manager application and the config drift and audit application. Thank you.